Welcome to the Neuro Diaries podcast. I'm your host, Jade Rose, writer, speaker, and mental health advocate. This podcast is a safe space where we can amplify our voices together. My mission is to make the world a safer and happier place for neurodivergent children and those struggling with mental health conditions and mental illness. The Neuro Diaries podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land. I'd like to pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. This episode was recorded on Narrego country. This podcast openly discusses mental health issues and may contain content that is distressing for some. Please take care in deciding if this content is right for you today. Breaking stigma through stories. Welcome to the Neuro Diaries podcast. Welcome back to the Neuro Diaries. I'm your host, Jade Rose, and today I've got Fiona with me from Wild Island Woman. Welcome, Fiona.
Hi, Jade.
Hi, thanks for joining us here today. Fiona runs an adventure tourism business with her husband in Tasmania, Australia, and uses her platform to speak about, Fiona, what do you like to speak about?
So generally, I like to speak about getting out into nature, how valuable that is for us to spend time in nature's wild places, and how we can support each other to get out into nature. And I also recently like speaking up around my mental health.
Wonderful. And we've connected and we've had a few chats over Instagram and sort of bonded in a way over synergies, both our love of nature and then also our experience of living with bipolar as well. And Fiona has a really interesting story to share and how her bipolar really came, the onset of it really came about as a result of hormonal shifts in experiencing perimenopause. So I'm really excited to have you here today because I will be honest, this is not an area that I have a lot of knowledge in. It's something that I think is not very widely spoken about at all and could really help a lot of people by, being able to hear more about this. So thanks so much for coming on to share it.
Thanks for having me, Jade. Yeah, I look forward to diving right in.
Yeah. Well, a lot of my questions are going to be, might be quite naive and might just be quite open and curious because I'm really coming at it from, I guess, the everyday, what is that sort of perspective. So I'm excited to, see what I can learn today as well. So before we do jump in, I guess, can you just give us a little bit of an overview about who you are as a person, what your life involves, what you how you spend your time, what you do?
So for the last 15 years, I have been living in just out of Mountfield National Park in Tasmania, so an hour northwest of Hobart. So I've been living here with my husband. He's Tasmanian, so it was him that kind of anchored me here. And we have a home and we live between some of the most beautiful falls in Australia and some of the tallest flowering gums in the world. So just so much nature all around us here. Been here for 15 years. We started the business 13 years ago. So we started an adventure tourism business called Tassie Bound Adventure Tours. So mainly taking people out on the kayaks and down the river or out at Lake Pedder, so half-day adventures. So paddle with the platypus and down the rapids for something more adventurous, and then out on the lake if you want to learn more about the history and the big nature that Tasmania has to offer. So we've been doing that for 13 years, and then 8 years ago I really started to see and acknowledge so many women that struggled and had barriers around getting out into nature. So that's why I started Wild Island Women. So that's an adventure community for the women, and so it's all around breaking down those barriers and providing opportunities for them to come out on organised adventures, small groups, and we do things like overnights and canyoning and rafting and hiking and all those beautiful things that we can get up to down here in Tassie.
That's so cool. And for those who don't know, because I know we have some listeners in the States, some listeners in Scandinavia, which is cool. So Tasmania is a small island off the south coast of Australia. It is part of Australia. It's it feels, sometimes we refer to it as like a world of its own when you talk about like Tasmanians, and it does feel like a little bit of a different world down there. It's very much a very beautiful natural landscape and very adventurous sort of terrain as well. Fiona, I'm going to go in a little bit of a side tangent because I'm just really curious about what you said about some of, women getting out into nature and some of the barriers that they face. I'm spend a lot of time in nature myself, but it's something I generally always do with my husband or with someone else when I'm talking about overnight hikes and stuff. Is that some of the main barriers? Like what are the main barriers for women? Is it like fear-based, or what do you think are some of the main challenges for women getting out there?
Yeah, as I've been learning for the last 8 years as well, like I have been someone that has always felt very supported in nature and haven't really felt those barriers around being in nature. But what I'm learning around the women that are in our group is that there are real known barriers for them. So either they have gone through like various life transitions, so they may have gone through like a divorce and they feel like they don't have the confidence to get out there on their own. So some of it is also like they don't feel like they have the money to be able to afford like larger multi-day trips and things like that. They also feel like they may not have the right physical ability for it. So they've done kayaking like maybe 30 or 40 years ago, and they don't feel confident buying a kayak and getting out on a kayak by themselves or with a friend, and they really feel like they want to join an organized group and kind of like relearn those skills and feel supported while doing that. Yeah, and definitely. I think the biggest one that really gets me is a lot of women have horror stories around either going out with their husband or their brothers or friends and like have been left behind, or there's been something that's happened and it's kind of stayed with them and stopped them from like revisiting getting out into nature as well. So we're just helping them get through those memories of not having probably such a positive experience out in nature.
Yeah, that's really cool. So giving them that support. I remember the first time I went on like a multi-day with my husband, this was going back like 10 years ago. He used to do this stuff all the time, and he was like, all right, I'm going on this hike. If you're coming, like you got to organize your own food, pack your own water, this. And I was like, what? Like, you're not going to like help me or support me? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. So then, he did help me, but he didn't leave me stranded out there. But you're right, like when you're entering this world that does feel, very foreign, a lot of it is about survival, having those skills out there in the wild. I can see how that would really bridge that pathway, having that physical but also that sort of emotional support to build confidence out there. So yeah, that's amazing. Cool.
Yeah, and I think a lot of ours are just like 3 hours to half day, and that also really suits like new mums and mums with children of all ages. They feel like hubby will be okay looking after them for a couple of hours and that they can get away, but they feel like doing like spending the time like organizing that bigger trip or that bigger hike, or what if the weather's bad, and by going on an organized adventure with us, like we can organize all that, and even if the weather's not great, we organize like a trip somewhere else, and they can still get out and still use their time wisely.
No mum has the mental energy left over to plan an outdoor adventure with backup wet weather plans as well. So that's a great service.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, let's delve a bit more into the mental health side of things. So I wanted to open it up to you to introduce sort of what it is that you experience.
Yeah, so it's actually almost to the day I was diagnosed 2 years ago. So that's really interesting that we're talking about it today.
Happy anniversary.
When I was, yeah, actually bipolar anniversary. Yeah, I don't know if that's a thing, Jay, but we can make it a thing. Um, so I was diagnosed originally as bipolar schizoaffective. So perimenopausal onset.
Okay.
Bipolar schizoaffective
Okay.
was the diagnosis that I received to begin with.
So can we break that down a little bit for those that aren't sure? What does the schizoaffective aspect of bipolar mean?
It's really interesting, Jade. Like, I'm really new to it all.
Okay.
Didn't have much experience around bipolar. The schizoaffective is a little bit of a tricky, like, as you know, it's all on a bit of a spectrum as well. I think in my diagnosis, the schizoaffective came because it wasn't like out of a very obvious like manic episode. Like it was a psychotic episode, and they couldn't really pinpoint what was exactly going on for me. So like I hadn't had a history of like depression flicking up into the hypermania and mania, and then the psychotic episode. So I had no history of mental health illness, none whatsoever. Like, didn't suffer from depression and bipolar or anxiety. Had no panic attacks. Like, when people used to speak about having mental illness, I would kind of glaze over because I didn't have any lived experience of it. So I think the schizoaffective came about because they didn't really understand what was exactly happening with me.
Okay.
So they kind of gave me that broader diagnosis.
Okay. And then when you say perimenopause onset, so correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't been through this season of life yet, but perimenopause is referring to the sort of years before full menopause sets in. Is that right? So you're first starting to feel, I guess the first sort of symptoms of it.
Yeah. So to break it down, to make it super simple to understand, there's menopause, which is the end of your period. So you need to not have a period for 12 months.
Okay.
And then you're classified as being in menopause. But what actually happens is that you have a lead up to menopause, and that's what the perimenopausal part is. So that can go on for like 10 to 12 years prior to you actually getting to menopause. So it's a long transition.
It is, 10 to 12 years is a long time. And what happens during that time?
So what happens is a little bit like puberty. Our hormones go a little bit haywire. And what's happening is we have various different sex hormones. So like estrogen, we've got progesterone, testosterone, melatonin. So they're the main ones, and they're actually just jumping up and down. So we're not actually having this steady decline. You're getting these spikes and these periods where they drop really quickly. So a little bit how you are in puberty. You can kind of have that same kind of feelings of just being completely all over the place. And again, it's on a spectrum. So how we move through menopause, the menopause transition and perimenopause, it just depends on you individually. So a lot of the times mental health can become impacted, and that's also on a bit of a spectrum. So like depression, anxiety, panic attacks, sleep issues, all those type of things, mood, a lot of mood issues, which, as you know, all of those sound like bipolar, right? Like there's a lot of crossover there on like your perimenopausal mental health symptoms and bipolar anyway. So, and then you've just go through like physical changes, so like heavy periods, lighter periods, missing periods, like your cycle's no longer like that general 28 days that a lot of people kind of can track all through their menstrual years. Yeah, and then you're having like a lot of emotional symptoms as well. So yeah, it kind of affects your whole self and your whole being.
Yeah. I can only imagine the sort of like disruption that would feel like. I guess like I'm just in this phase at the moment of just learning about cyclic living and understanding that your menstrual cycle is more than that one week of the month where you actually have your period, but it actually your cycle lasts all month, and you have the 4 phases of it with the follicular and the ovulatory, the luteal, and that your mood, your energy, your foods, your sleep habit, like everything looks so different at each stage of the month. Like that is in itself is something that's so underspoken about, that I only learned this at 30 years old, and I really am still doing the work years later of just finally integrating this. I can only imagine I'm just starting to realize how big the impact of those stages are, and the hormones in those stages are on my physical, mental, emotional health. So I can only imagine the sort of disruption that would happen when that cycles becomes jumping up and down, as you say, and sort of mixed and all over the place, and then having to find your balance within that as well.
Yeah, like it's a tricky time, very tricky time, and I think the trickiest thing that happened with me is that the first things that I started to notice happening was that change of my cycle, and for me it wasn't like a lack of periods, like we think we're heading into perimenopause and menopause, that we're going to get lighter periods. But what happens is that we often get a lot heavier periods. And that was what I first noticed. So like coming through like 35, 36, 37, my periods just became heavier and heavier and heavier. And I went to the doctor and the GP and said, you know, like I'm having all these issues with my periods. I'm like an outdoor guide. You know, I need to like not be bleeding so much that I can't even head out without like a tampon and period undies and all the things, you know, to go out and work.
Yeah.
And he kind of like dismissed me to start with. And he said, look, it's quite normal. We'll check your iron levels and we'll just keep monitoring it. And what ended up happening is that they just got heavier and heavier. And what I did was, because I knew he was just going to dismiss me again if I went back, and I got a pack of tampons, and I knew that one tampon held 12 milligrams or something of blood.
Yeah.
Or 12 grams. And so what I did is I just used those tampons and like counted how many that I filled up over my period, and I actually got to 500 milligrams. Like I was losing so much blood.
Okay.
And I went back to the GP and I said, look, I've been measuring it and it's actually like this is how much I'm losing.
Wait,
and,
so how
it's
many
stopping me working.
I need to know, how many tampons is that? If we look at 500 milligrams.
Yeah,
I
don't know. I think it's 12.
Okay, what's 500 divided by 12?
Yeah, so 12 grams. So I was using large ones. So they're 15.
Yeah.
15. So 500 divided by 15 that's a lot. My brain's not working, Jade.
I'm not even going to attempt that. 33.
33 tampons.
33.
Large.
Okay.
Large tampons.
So that's...
Yeah, so
that feels like a lot. Yeah. That's massive.
it's a lot. It's huge. And, you know, I think this expensive, and these things were happening over time. So it's not like I just woke up and was having 500 gram periods.
Yeah.
like over about 3 years, they just became heavier and heavier. So I didn't really notice it that much. And, I progressed to using menstrual cups and period undies. So you didn't really notice
Yeah, the increase.
what was going on as well.
Yeah.
Because I stopped being able to use tampons because I was bleeding through them.
Yeah.
And they were just super expensive as well and bad for the environment. So that's why I changed to the cup and using the undies. So it wasn't until I went back to the GP again and said, I'm having, 500-gram periods. And he was just like, the blood kind of drained from his face. And he was like, wow, that's an issue. That's a real issue.
Okay.
And I was taking the iron supplements and eating all the right foods. I was very holistic with all that type of stuff. And he actually sent me off to a ultrasound, and they found a very large fibroid sitting on top of my cervix.
Okay.
So what ended up happening is that like you can't cramp, and you can't hold the blood, so that's why it was coming like straight through.
Yeah.
And it was building up as well with the hormonal imbalance, building up really thick lining.
Yeah, right.
And that's kind of like what was happening. Anyway, I then went to a women's health GP because I thought, look, I really need to go see like a specialist. And, we did more tests, and they just recommended that I had a hysterectomy. Which, was tricky for me to take, a partial hysterectomy. So I'd leave my ovaries, take my my cervix and my womb.
Yeah.
And so it was tricky to kind of get my head around. I was I am quite a natural person and would like to keep my body parts if I can. And so that was hard to hear. And but I also knew that how much life I was losing, and that it's not something that can, usually what happens as you move through perimenopause is, so fibroids is also really common in perimenopause, and they only get bigger. So it was only going to get more of an issue rather than get better. Yeah, but I did still try lots of Ayurvedic alternatives and natural alternatives, but I think it was just so big at this stage that there was nothing that was going to help. So it was interesting. So I had that diagnosis. I then had all these issues around my mood, rage, and not being able to, like ground myself, and just feeling like angry and moody and just not myself. And, I was having all these issues with my sleep, and then waking up early, which can also be perimenopausal as well.
So I was going to ask about the moods stuff. So did that come up for you sort of at the same time as these heavy periods were starting to get heavier, or was it more after the hysterectomy side of things, or sort of how did that escalate?
Yeah, so I still had my uterus at this stage, and I'd had the diagnosis about the fibroids, and I had private health insurance, because if you don't have private health insurance, you go on a waiting list, and it can take years and years and years and years, because it's not actually like a surgery that is needed. So it's usually like a long wait list. So luckily for me, we had private health, and the surgeon couldn't book it in, and I had to do it not in my season, like at the end of the season. So I had it booked in for like March, the end of March. Yeah. That following year. So like in a year's time.
Okay.
So but I was doing everything else possible with the herbs.
So you
and
had a year to see, like, if it doesn't change, I've got this booked in.
Exactly. And I was doing like oil packs and just so much stuff. Like, I was just going hell bent on trying to like fix this so I didn't have to have the surgery. And and then but what was actually happening was things were like getting worse. Moods were affected, and like it was more than just the PMS. Like I felt like the sleep as well, like waking up at like 3 and not being able to get back to sleep. And I was also like waking up and being like quite expressive, so like waking up and having all these ideas and writing, and being like really creative, like early in the morning as well, like And then it kind of like moved into like, I was having like terror dreams about my childhood and being a small baby and not being fed enough and being kept in like a dark room and no one was coming to get me and so I was like
Wow.
waking up out of like my sleep with all these terror dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of like was having just a whole lot of symptoms
Yeah.
and they were just getting worse and worse. And then what ended up happening, and it kind of came to a head, I kind of approached my family about some things that I wanted answers to, and there was an estrangement there, and I thought I just needed to take some time out and take some time away, like with the intensity of my own feelings and what was coming up for me.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I just snapped into a depressive episode.
Okay.
Really depressive, really low. Like I didn't even really know what depression was, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But you know, like I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't function. It was only for my husband like prompting me, that was allowing me to kind of like do the basic things like have a shower and eat and
Yeah.
all those type of things. So like I lost quite a bit of weight, like maybe around like 10 kilos, which is a lot for me. I'm not a big
It's a lot.
person.
Yeah.
And just because I like lost my appetite, you know, sleep was even harder. But it's tricky because Liam, my husband, is amazing, and we'd been together for 15 years, and he just put it down to that I'd just been through a lot and that I was just sad and processing stuff with my family and that I would just come back out of it. And we ended up going away. So we finished the season and we went away to Queensland at that time and spent some time on this beautiful farm. And Liam was there, and then Liam left me. Liam was there for a month and I was there alone for a month.
Okay.
And it was interesting. My mood just picked up. Like it was like that. Like as quickly as it came down, as quickly as it came back up again. And you know, I was really creative and just felt like myself. Like I guess reaching out and speaking to friends, and I did a podcast interview back then, and yeah, like I just really felt like myself again.
Yeah.
And then we came back home to start the season, and it was September, October, and I ran a big event that an event manager dropped out of last minute, so it was this huge stress
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
like having to run this huge event by myself. And Liam jumped in, my husband, and you know we got it done, but it was like super stressful.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the tours had started and I was guiding on tour, and there was like high river levels, and again it was quite stressful. And yeah, before a tour I kind of started having feelings about, I saw actually a week before that I saw Grace Tame. So
Okay.
she
Yep.
is an Australian of the Year. She speaks about her being a survivor of sexual abuse, and so I'd also seen her and was reading her story about pedophiles in Hobart and all that type of stuff. And as I was going to the tour one day, I was in the car and I just said to Liam, look, I just feel like there's like pedophiles in the community, and you know I was getting really paranoid around like pedophiles and who could the pedophiles be. And you know Liam just thought, that's really odd, but he'd talk about it to me like after the tour.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was interesting, like on the tour,
Yeah.
these thoughts just gathered momentum like really quickly, and we usually stop for a break for brownies and a tea, and I kind of pulled out of the river, and I don't know if I rang a friend about it, or I think I got on my phone and did something, Googled about it.
Yeah.
And then yeah, the panic started, and then by the end of the tour, I wouldn't come up to Liam, and I said that there's policemen waiting for me. So I kind of just fell into a psychotic episode really quickly.
Yeah, right.
And then that just gathered momentum. Liam thought I was just like had a bad day and that I just was tired and I was going to snap out of it. But things just got like really bad really quickly, and that was the catalyst for my first hospital stay.
Yeah, wow. Thanks for talking us through like what actually happened, because it's not often you hear like actually follow the story of how you got into it. And I can I can see how you read the book and you hear the story and like how that just snowballed for you and turned into that. So it was really interesting to sort of follow your path there. But wow, there's just so much into that that story. I can totally I can see how your husband and how a lot of people would think, yeah, you're having these moods and everything, but it's understandable because you've been through XYZ. You're having these huge hormonal shifts. You're going through this trauma at the moment. You can see yes, how those moods would play out. What was it? Was it the psychotic episode, or was that the catalyst that made you realize this is more than just like hormonal differences, or this is more than just unpacking my childhood? Or what was the point that sort of made you realize actually there is something deeper, like bipolar, at play here?
Yeah, well, I think because it was so dramatic, we're rural, and Liam ended up having to call the police and the paramedics and neighbors because I just escalated so much.
Yeah.
So I don't really remember that part of it.
A lot of people say that about mania or the psychotic episodes, is they actually don't really remember it afterwards.
Yeah, like Liam took a video of me, just in case I wanted to see it later on.
Yeah.
And I just think, wow, it's just my whole sense of reality left me. And it definitely it didn't seem like me at all. But yeah, so I was taken to the RHH. So it's also interesting, Jade, even though I had private health, if you're scheduled in Tasmania or down south, the southern parts of Tasmania, they don't have the tools in the private to help with undiagnosed, scheduled patients.
Okay.
So they naturally take you in through the public, where they have more tools and more resources to deal with first case psychosis and things like that.
Okay.
So I think it was there. So I was given all the meds, and by the time I got to hospital, I was kind of unconscious.
Right.
But I also hadn't slept for this is nearly 2 days now.
Okay. Wow.
And that they gave me all the anti-psych meds and to come out of the psychosis, and I responded super well.
Mm-hmm.
I came out within 12 hours, and by the next day I was back to myself and acting myself and being myself and all those things. So I didn't wake up in a psychotic episode at all.
That's good, because they can last for you do hear of them lasting for weeks or months even. So
or the drugs don't help at all. So I've got friends that I've met in hospital who said the meds aren't supportive at all for them coming out of their psychotic episode. So I was super lucky, and then I was they did all the brain scans and all that type of stuff, and they admitted me to the psychiatric ward, and I guess they really wanted to kind of monitor me and kind of see what actually it is. Because I was 41 and a half with no mental health issues and no physical issues at all my whole life. I was really fit and healthy and never went to the doctor and all that type of stuff. So that and I think so I got the diagnosis 2 weeks later. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and so at discharge I was given the diagnosis of perimenopausal onset bipolar disorder.
Okay. Well, it sounds Like, there's a lot that can be said about the healthcare system and experiencing misdiagnosis and not taking it seriously or being dismissive. It sounds like they actually did a fair job of, you know, keeping you there long enough, helping you out of it, and I mean, sounds like giving you an accurate diagnosis that you could work with. Is that sort of how you think of it? Am I right in thinking that that actually sounds like a pretty good healthcare story?
Yeah, like like looking back on it now, like I think yes, I was very lucky. There are a couple of things at play with me, and that was I was having so much pain with my fibroid at this time as well. So it was probably the worst pain. When I had the psychotic episode, it was the worst pain I'd ever felt. So it was radiating down my right leg, and I was actually having problems using my right leg. So when I was in hospital, I was like saying to the psychiatrist, like, I've got so much pain and it's radiating down my right leg. Like, maybe I need to have another scan. Like, maybe there's something happening with the fibroid.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I think so. Like, he was like, lay down and let me like feel and let me see if I can kind of like feel it.
Yeah.
And let's get you into a scan. And he actually called my gynecologist and said, you know, what's going on with Fiona and what do you think is happening?
Amazing.
And it was them. So it was my GP, my women's health GP, that said perimenopausal. She's got a history of like her grandmother going through perimenopause at 42 and having a terrible time, and she's had a nan that had ECT therapy in her late 30s, and a mum with postnatal depression.
Yeah. It's so
Put her
good.
on estrogen straight away.
What do you call it? Collaboration between them. Like, you just don't see that these days. I'm sure, like, maybe it is a rural thing that actually, like, a great thing. I'm sure if you went into Sydney, like, they're not going to bother trying to call your gynecologist or anyone. It's sort of like in and out the door. You're just another patient to them for the most part, I'd say. But, you know, that's just, I've never heard of that level of collaboration and actually listening to each other and listening to you before. So I love that. That's great.
Yeah, I was just so lucky. And I think because I was able to advocate for myself.
Yeah.
And like really understand my body and say to him, like, I think this might be a factor.
Yeah.
And
which is probably a big part of it as well, because I think a lot of the time people don't realise how much of a need there is to advocate for yourself when you do go into the healthcare system. You sort of go in expecting, like, these are the experts, they're going to have the answers, but they really don't. And you really need to speak up and let them know every little thing that's going on, and sort of do your own research, come with your own opinions, and sort of really push that on them at times to make sure you are listened to. So that probably plays a big part in it as well, you doing that for yourself.
Yeah. And I just think I was you're right, like extremely lucky. And I think that's one positive about being diagnosed later on in life, is that you generally have, you know, a history of like knowing your body a bit more and like understanding it, and knowing what feels right and what doesn't feel right. And but I was put on the estrogen patches. So estrogen is what really impacts mental health as well as progesterone, which when I went back to the women's health GP, they put me on progesterone as well. If you're going to be on estrogen, you have to take progesterone, because otherwise your lining will build up too much.
Okay.
So progesterone helps you like to keep that lining down, which is probably why I was lacking it, because I had such like a build up of that in my uterus as well, which is why they were so heavy. So progesterone also helps with like depression and anxiety and sleep.
Wow.
And estrogen is what comes up and down so much for us in perimenopause. So you're getting all those mood changes. So estrogen is all about like keeping the mood at a nice calm level. We get a lot of estrogen when the first few years of having a baby. You know, that beautiful hormone that you're getting, to help connect with the baby and help with the sleep and all those type of things as well. It's a protective hormone for you. So yeah, like I was on the patches straight away, on the progesterone, and then like Liam told them about my issues with my mood and having the big slump with depression earlier on, and then me picking up into with more what I know now of like hypomania symptoms. So yeah, like that was kind of happening six months to a year before diagnosis.
Okay. And how, since getting the diagnosis and getting, the understanding of perimenopause and getting the treatment for that, how have you found the bipolar symptoms? Have they changed? Have they, continued on since then? Are you still experiencing episodes? Like, what does that look like for you sort of now, being a little bit further down the line?
Yeah, so it probably goes back to how I was diagnosed and being diagnosed in hospital. So they gave me medication, of course, psychiatric medication, and as well as the hormones. And they said it is best practice to stay on these meds for at least 12 months to 24 months after your first episode psychosis. So that's kind of like what they gave me. So there was never any discussion on, this is bipolar, it's a lifelong condition, it's chronic, you're going to have it for life. Like, we didn't really have that discussion. So it was really interesting coming home and being on the estrogen patches and the progesterone and the antipsychotic meds and the mood stabilizer. Yeah, like I was definitely, like I felt a lot numb. I feel like there was one medication that just felt too much for me, that it was too heavy. But when I was discharged, I didn't really have the access to a psychiatrist at the time. And so I was just referred back to the GP. So I'd go back to the GP and just say, like, this is, what's happening now with the meds. And he called the team at the hospital and said, look, it's just best that you stay on them for like 12 to 24 months. And then I did what I'm learning is what a lot of people do that have just been diagnosed with bipolar, is I slowly came off the meds. And
you decided, I'm fine, I don't need that.
And I also just thought, like, maybe the hormones were enough to hold me. If I stay on the hormones, maybe that's enough to hold me. So over the winter time, I came off the mood stabilizer, and then I came off the antipsych. I still stayed on one antipsych for sleep, and then I was on the estrogen and the progesterone, and then so 6 months later, I had a manic episode and was back in hospital. So in that late January, February. So, and that's when I only had a 1 week stay, and they reviewed all the meds, and I'm on different meds now than I was when I was first diagnosed. And so I've been trialing those meds, and I think that's when the reality hit that I really did have bipolar, and that this is going to be a thing, and the grief around that really hit. And it was tricky because I could no longer kind of like pretend that it was just like a one-off thing.
It is really tricky, and I think everyone with bipolar that I've spoken to has sort of gone through this period that you're describing, this grief and this sort of letting it sink in of like, this coming to terms with it. It's hard to do because it is a lifelong thing and there's no cure, and I'm going to have to live with this forever, and I'm always going to have to be on the lookout for this. I'm always going to have to be managing it and living with a level of discipline to try and, avoid triggering episodes. And it's, there's an element of grief there for sure. And there's an element of, unfairness as to why can't I go and like do all these things because that they're going to sort of trigger an episode. I had one the other day because I was like so exhausted from just my week and my work and everything, and I wanted to just take an evening where I just lay down on the couch and watch TV, which sounds pretty normal. But my husband saw me and was concerned because he's like, oh no, like what's wrong? Thinking it's an episode. And we had a good talk about it, and I actually felt really fine and was like, no, like I'm just bottom out, like tired. I just want to like have a rest for the evening. But his concerns were pretty valid because usually when I'm like that, like that is the start of an episode coming. But it's also really interesting because if I let myself have that rest and I stay down there in this place of like, I'm tired, I need to rest, if I just stayed there and waited to naturally pick up again, I might not. I might just actually stay down there and it might be the onset of a low mood episode. So there is this real need to just be vigilant and just always force yourself back up again in a way. I don't know, it'd be nice to just be able to like rest and watch TV without having to worry about that actually triggering a mood episode, because that's one of the things for me is it would, you know. So yeah, there's definitely this coming to terms with element and figuring out your own triggers, and that it's a heavy process. How are you? Because I know you said so 2 years post diagnosis. Sometimes it takes people, you know, a lot longer to sort of come to where you are now.
Yeah, it's been a real tricky journey, especially since the beginning of the year, and I had that second episode. So they changed my diagnosis to perimenopausal onset bipolar 1 with psychotic features.
Okay.
So that's where it's sitting at the moment. I think they can get some more context now that it is the bipolar 1, and yeah, it's more of a classic one situation. So for me, so yeah, like I have that, and you know, I have still had symptoms on the meds. So over winter time, I definitely, the UK scale, bipolar scale, has been like really helpful for me. So I did my own one of that, like knowing that I've had, you know, quite a few episodes now in a couple of years. Like, what is my 1? What is my 2? What am I doing when I am at 3 and as I head up the scale? And, you know, I did notice that I dropped down to like a 3 or 4 over winter time, even with the meds. Yeah. And then as soon as like September 1 hit, I had sleep issues, and you know, I had a little bit of sleep anxiety, and you know, it's hard to know if it's like hypomania, but like just feeling more creative. And yeah, and it's tricky because, you know, back before diagnosis I would just roll with my creativity and I wouldn't question it, but now like it's just like, is that creativity or is that like a hypomania symptom? And it's really tricky, you know, because I'm also still so new into the journey, like knowing exactly what everything means. And you know, previously when I'd had sleep issues, it had developed into a manic or a psychotic episode. So like it was really tricky recently when I've had these issues with my mood to really know what was underneath that all.
Yeah, I get that. I think that is a hard thing, and it's like, oh, I'm experiencing this creativity, which is amazing, and you want to keep going with it. But then if it's a symptom of hypomania, there is this element, or at least for me, it's this very sort of manual trying to stop yourself in your tracks and rein it back in so it doesn't escalate to full-blown mania. It's almost, it does feel like a spiral, and there's sort of a like if you picture yourself in an ocean, sort of there's a whirlpool, and if you're starting to go around the edge of it, if you're right on the top, it's sort of like you have a bit more control to sort of pull yourself out of it. But if you slip too far down sort of either end of the spiral, your control and your ability to come out of it seems, you know, it gets a lot less. So I think there is like a real need to sort of identify which symptoms are what, and also trying to, it's a constant work to try and keep yourself on a sort of even keel.
Yeah, and I think that the tricky element with me as well is that I do have this hormonal impact. And, you know, when it is things like sleep, like, you know, you kind of go to like, is it the progesterone, or like, is it something else behind it, rather than bipolar? And and I'm still, it's been 2 months I've been struggling with my sleep, and I've got a psychiatrist appointment in a week's time. I've had 5 sessions with a psychologist. I've been back at the GP. I've been seeing the gynecologist. Like, it just feels like, just trying to find out and get to the bottom of it is really tricky. And I think mainly with me, like, coming to terms with that there may not be a reason that I can pinpoint.
Totally. Yeah. There is no reason. It's just bipolar.
Maybe I've just built up a bit of a tolerance to the sleeping med, like the antipsychotic sleeping med that I take. I've been on it for 2 years now, so maybe it's just a tolerance issue. And
could be, yeah.
Like, you don't know. You don't know. Like, and then you go through, like, is it food? I'm eating too much sugar, and like, mind just boggles.
Yeah, it is a lot trying to understand it all. I found a lot of comfort in just saying it's just bipolar. There's no rhyme or reason. Like, that is what it is. Took a lot of mental stress away for me, trying to figure out all the reasons for it. Fiona, I wanted to talk about, so we were chatting over Instagram recently about this post that Nicole LePera put up. So Nicole LePera, very famous. She's known as the holistic psychologist. She's a fully licensed psychologist that has sort of moved away from what we'd call traditional psychology to focus on what she calls a holistic approach. And it's really grounded in theories of attachment theory, with this idea of childhood trauma being at the core front or the basis of a lot of mental health issues that come up. So she, personally, I think it's valid for a lot of things, and a lot of things like depression, anxiety can be misdiagnosed as those things, when really it could be just coming from a basis of CPTSD. That was definitely my husband's experience. He had, those sorts of labels for 10 years before we got into a really good psychologist that actually was able to dig deeper and identify, and he was sort of ready to unpack that. I find a lot of it is quite valid. She did a post the other day that was saying that bipolar is also attributed to attachment theory in childhood, and this idea of sort of grieving components of your childhood that you didn't experience. I know a lot of people in the bipolar community were quite upset by it and sort of had a view of it dismissing, or it's, not identifying bipolar symptoms. Also can be quite worrisome for people with bipolar, and sort of pushing them down sort of the wrong treatment path, or, blocking them from getting the treatment that they need. I have quite a philosophical approach to it. I like, being able to sit with it and sort of reflect on parts I agree with, parts I don't agree with. And I think everyone just has a different story, right? Like, bipolar has a different onset for everyone. Bipolar presents differently in everyone. And I know we spoke a little bit about it, and for your particular experience with the onset and sort of how it relates to your family experience as well, there were parts of that you really identified with. So I was keen to dig into a little bit more of, this grief element of it and things that you experienced in childhood and how that resonated for you.
Yeah, great question, Jade. And the grief and the childhood trauma was such a big factor for me, specifically, especially in my story. So even just before I had that episode and that estrangement with my family, I did mention earlier that I was waking up with these dreams about being a very small child and not having my needs met. So this trauma, this grief, this primal need for mother. And I had done a lot of work around what they call or coin the mother wound. So it's pretty much is that the mother wound is something that we kind of all have, and it's around the grief and gap between the mother that we had and the mother that we wanted. And so I had worked through this, so pretty much the inner child work. So before I had the diagnosis of bipolar, so around me as a 2-year-old and me as like a 7-year-old and things that happen as a teenager. And so I was really able to connect to those parts of myself that were wounded, that weren't seen, that were traumatized, and able to fill the mother gap. So become the inner mother that I didn't have growing up.
Yeah.
My mother had postnatal depression, so another issue with hormones and mental health. So yeah, it was interesting that I had done all this work. So I really spent so much time like identifying this for me, and like also identifying all those really hard emotions like sadness and like grief and longing and belonging, and also anger. Like, you know, there was this rebellious self, this rebellious teenager self inside me that like didn't feel seen and heard, and all those things as well. So I'd done years of work around the inner mother and filling the mother gap, and acknowledging all those parts. But I found it so difficult connecting to the inner baby self. So like connecting to like the newborn me, and like I guess the first like 12 months.
Okay.
And I've been doing some work with the my psychologist at the moment around it, and sitting with it. And you know, I think why it's so hard is that it's so primal, like that mother instinct, like that hormonal drive to kind of like want to love and take care of this little being, this little soul. And because I was with a mother that like struggled with that, you know, I obviously didn't receive, or I felt this unwantedness and this grief around not having that. And I think that was a lot what was coming up for me in those dreams, like waking me up in the middle of the night, was this this real grief around it. So I guess the post of the holistic psychologist, you know, it really helped me feel seen. I know it didn't sit with many in the bipolar community as well, but for me it feels like it's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And it was really nice for that to be acknowledged. And it's just really allowed me to kind of, you know, tend to it now. So like, rather than kind of like heal it, like I don't think I can get to healing the mother wound for that part of me.
Yeah.
Just like I don't think I can get to healing bipolar.
Yeah.
And all those other really heavy emotions that I kind of, you know, hanging around me at the moment. And you know, I just think I can just step back now and just like acknowledge it and see it for what it is, and definitely tend to it, but not want to like rush into that healing of it. And kind of just take it with me rather than it being like a huge part of me. And so that's kind of like where I'm sitting with it now.
It kind of sounds like reaching a point of being like, okay, I really want like something that you really want closure on, but then reaching that point where you're like understanding that you're possibly never going to get that closure, and then learning to be okay with it. I know it's a sort of a different scenario, but I'm just trying to like make sense of it in that way, like knowing this part of me, I may never actually be able to heal this. And that's just something that I've got to learn to be okay with. Like it is with bipolar, this is something that I'm never actually going to cure, but learning to live with that and be okay with that. Is that sort of the feeling that you're having?
Yeah, and I just think expressing that grief has been a big one. You know, it has definitely been more around sadness lately. Rather than the anger. I think before I was diagnosed and when I had that estrangement with my family, there was a lot of like rage. Like they call it perimenopausal rage. and a little bit maybe like PMS. Some people might find that in that part of their cycle as well. But just this overcomes you with so much heat as well. But lately, it's kind of been like more grief around bipolar as well. But I think just acknowledging that for my inner like newborn, inner little child, little baby, little newborn me, that she also didn't get it. Like really, like she didn't get it, but like she's so wanted now. Like I want her, and like I'm here for that part of me, and that's kind of where I'm at and where it's moving to. But I think these parts of ourselves need what the holistic psychologist speaks about. I don't think she speaks directly on the mother wound. I haven't heard her speak about that. But yeah, like I think these attachment issues and these unhealed smaller parts of us do need to be seen and heard and loved and to be shown up for. And I think sometimes they do kind of like run the show for us.
Yeah. Well, we know that like bipolar can be onset by many different things. One of them definitely being trauma. So it, like to a degree, I think it makes sense that individuals that did experience any form of childhood trauma, even just something that is neglect, right? Like emotional neglect. If you had a parent or caregiver that wasn't able to show up and meet your needs in the way that you needed them to, like that, does give a level of traumatic experience that can make you, I guess, more predisposed to developing the onset of bipolar later in life. So I do agree, like after reflecting on it for a while, like I do agree with that in some sense as well. And I mean, I had a similar sort of experience growing up. I just came from a very sort of dismissive family. There was never sort of emotional support or validation. And then, subsequently as an adult, I'm just out here like, validate me. That's, the one need that you have. Always looking for that. So it's, it's those things that show up for us in that you don't get as a child and then you need later on. But we know as well that like individuals with bipolar or any sort of neurodivergence, you're also more likely to have experienced trauma from a result of having your particular emotional needs in a world that is not really built to provide for them in a way. So I had a sort of a chicken and egg sort of reaction to it. I'm like, well, I did have some emotional neglect. Then I formed bipolar. Is it a result of having the emotional neglect, or did I experience a neglect because I had these needs that were not seen or recognized? That was my personal reaction to it. And then, but I also heard from a lot of other people that sort of said, well, I had a great childhood. I had no level of abuse or neglect, and I still have bipolar. So I think it's definitely not like a one size fits all category. I think people could have a beautiful childhood and all of that, and then have something else that triggers the onset of bipolar for them. I think there's probably so many different outcomes or different things that could cause that.
Definitely. And I think it's just nice for you to acknowledge that and just to be aware of that there is these parts, the younger parts of yourself that have these needs, and you can meet those needs as a grounded, solid adult. And you don't need to seek them externally. I think it's beautiful just to acknowledge it, and
I think so too.
And just know that they didn't get the childhood that they wanted, and they didn't get the mother that they wanted, and but then at the end of the day, like, what is the perfect mother? And there's always going to be things that you weren't provided for as well. So it's nice. What's going to help move the needle for us, and things resonate with some people and things don't resonate with others.
Exactly.
But I just appreciated her post, and I think with me it we've spoken quite in length about my diagnosis, and now I just think it was a bit of the perfect storm. I had,
Yeah.
you know, the generational issues. I had a mother with postnatal depression, so that hormonal dysregulation. Yeah, and I had, you know, that inner child stuff come up, and that trauma.
It all came up at the same time
Yeah,
for you.
all at the same time. And it was interesting because I have spent a lot of time building stability for myself, especially in my 30s. I traveled a lot in my 20s, traveled the world, and then met Liam and really wanted more of a stable life and a stable job and a stable home. And so I was so safe. Like
Yeah.
I'd built this real safety net for myself. And I think maybe was that a part of it as well? Like I just got to such a level of safety that I could kind of
You could unpack it and yeah.
unpack it, and then maybe I couldn't unpack it, and that's what bipolar is this maladaptation of like trauma, and like, so it's kind of tricky to know exactly what it is, but I think that's what's so interesting about bipolar is that no two stories are the same, and we're getting diagnosed at all ages now.
Yeah. And I even think, like, because they say it doesn't occur in childhood, but does it? Like, who knows? Maybe we are actually born this way and it presents differently as childhood. It's not like a 4-year-old can really advocate for themselves and articulately describe, like, everything that they're experiencing. So there's so many different, ways to think about it more fully.
Yeah, and I kind of started for businesses in my 30s. And I often think, was that bipolar?
Yeah, totally.
Like, was that
you
the
look
bipolar
back
part?
and you're like, that's interesting.
That is interesting.
Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah, but the psychiatrist said I probably wouldn't have to need to know that was bipolar. Like it could have just been you, and to acknowledge yourself as well in doing those things. But yeah, you do kind of go back and excavate the whole story and be like, where did this really show up? But generally, when I asked friends and family, they would say I was the least likely to develop bipolar. So
interesting.
It's also tricky for me as well because I'm getting to that point, and I read this amazing book, Befriending Bipolar, by I think Oliver Segman.
Okay.
And it's probably one of the only bipolar books I've actually read. But that was amazing, like bipolar 1, and he'd had it since his 20s, but struggled with his relationship with the meds and being on meds. And, I felt really seen reading that book and, getting to acceptance of that and how he got to acceptance and really coming to terms with the condition and befriending that part of himself, and befriending the meds. But yeah, he was, diagnosed for 25 years before he kind of got to
get to that point.
So it was really good that I could read a book and kind of fast track that for myself as well. So I think it's really important that, we're out there in the world, and, you wrote down in one of the pre-interview questions, what are we learning from bipolar? And, I'm just so grateful that I can learn, I can be diagnosed in 2022 and I have all this information. And I've got these people that I can follow and, living really amazing lives yourself, and that, we can also be well and, and actually have really amazing lives. So yeah, that's positive.
Yeah. Fiona, I've so loved having you on today. Thank you so much for coming on to share your story, and I think there's so many takeaways that we can learn from you. If you want to go and find Fiona, she's on Wild Island Woman on Instagram. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Jade. And we never know, we might see each other in real life sometime.
Maybe out on a trail or out in the outdoors somewhere. Enjoying the Neuro Diaries? Every interaction helps break the stigma, so be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favourite podcast listening app. Visit our Instagram at the Neuro Diaries Podcast and join our Facebook group to continue the conversation. Through sharing and connection, we can foster understanding, empathy, and support for all.